misinterpreting. This is more of a comment. Um, I feel that I've reached a point where I understand, or as it were, my orientation is that the intelligence is misinterpreting itself, and that's what all of this is, and that if we hold anything to be a certain way, or if we believe, and that's where the problems happen.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the problem starts.
Yeah.
So anything that I can see or conceptualize or hold anything to be a certain way, is that the inherent intelligence that is misinterpreting itself?
Yes. Not what you see, what you interpret. Because you don't see things, you just see radiance. If you think you're seeing things, then you're interpreting the radiance. And like you said, it's the interpreting that is the problem. The intelligence misinterpreting itself. All there is radiance. But when the radiance is interpreted to be things or conditions or entities or situations or anything like that, then that's a misinterpretation.
So I see myself interpreting and defining and connecting dots and that kind of stuff, making conceptual models. And so that is the misinterpretation.
Yeah, and it does. And if you do that, it doesn't matter because the mind will unceasingly do that.
Yeah.
The activity is not the problem; it's believing that activity is true is the problem. Because all these interpretations are actually hypothetical, and when you see they're hypothetical, then they don't matter; they don't have any strength. But when you start to believe them, when you start to believe they're objectively true, that's where it's a problem.
Yeah, it's just all going on, and I don't want to negate anything because that's probably being more negative and kind of.
There's nothing to negate, nothing needs to be changed. Interpreting is fine, but it's just hypothetical energy of the intelligence. The main thing is feel the radiance, rest in the radiance, which of course you always are. And then that is the true perspective, and that will communicate itself more and more thoroughly, more and more deeply.
Yeah, I feel that happening.
Good. Anything you experience is actually radiance. So there's nothing false about experience. Experience and radiance are synonymous. So experience is just experience, but it's not of anything. When you start thinking it's of anything, like, oh, I'm experiencing a room, or I'm experiencing a world, or I'm experiencing people, or I'm experiencing a body, or all those things, that's when it's a misinterpretation. The experience itself is just these infinite patternings, and that is just pure radiance.
So the patternings, sometimes I get confused with the patternings because the patternings are, well, how do you define patterning?
It can't be defined because it's transcendental. They're apparent, but you can't define them because when you look at them closely, you can't pin down what it is.
What would it be like? All of these different colors.
Yeah, what we call shapes, what we call colors, what we call textures, what we call anything. But what they actually are, not what we call it. The color is an interpretation, but what color refers to is a transcendental actuality. It's a patterning that if you look at it, you can't pin it down. It's miraculous.
And same thing with
form, color, texture, anything like that.
So
any quality of energy, any quality of experience is just transcendental radiance. And radiance has an infinitely broad range of characteristics that it can present in, but it never departs from being radiance. It's like a dream. You can dream of anything, but whatever you dream of is nothing but dream. You're dreaming dream. It can look like absolutely anything, but there's never anything there but dream. It's when you think there's something there other than dream that you can get caught up in it, and all of a sudden it comes in to be a problem or whatever. But it's the interpretation that generates all problems, not the presence of the field of characteristics.
But the interpretations will never stop.
Yeah, they're not important because they're radiance too, of course. It's only if you think they're accurate that it is potentially problematic. And even that isn't actually problematic because that's just radiance too. But it can seem to be problematic when you're with it immaturely. So, in the beginning, learn to see radiance, learn to see that your interpretations are not accurate, and stay with the radiance. Eventually, as you mature with being with the radiance, you'll see that the interpretations are radiance, and you'll see that even believing is radiance, and even holding things to be true is radiance. And when you get to that point, it's not a problem. But that's not true in the beginning. In the beginning, that is a problem. So in the beginning, you need to learn to discriminate. You need to learn to see actual radiance and see that the interpretations are inaccurate, and then rest in the radiance. And as you do so, you will become more and more familiar with the radiance. You'll become more and more integrated with radiance as reality, and eventually, even the interpretations and beliefs and all of that won't be a problem at all. And that's what can be called liberation. when you're free beyond the possibility of re-entrapment. That's liberation. You're Teflon. Nothing can stick.
Is that? I was wondering how you experience dreams in that sense. Like, there's the experience I have of a lucid dream where I'm suddenly free of the circumstances of the moment. But since I spend only a tiny fraction of my dream time lucid. Usually, often there's annoying circumstances and stressful things going on, and it would be much easier if I just didn't care what happened to me in all those situations.
Well, if you stay with radiance, eventually you won't care without needing to be lucid.
Yeah.
But the trick is to train. You have to. You basically at the beginning, at the sort of the first half of your unfolding, you have to train yourself to rest in radiance.
Okay.
And as you do so, you will recognize it more and more profoundly. And then eventually, the resting in radiance takes over, and then liberation begins to kick in. It gets stronger and stronger, where you're free even when you're not resting in radiance. Just the certainty of the feel that you're free. You're free without even needing to rest in radiance.
Yeah.
And at that point, that's true liberation.
Right.
And that it builds, but the path, such as it is resting in radiance. Feel radiance, feel the truth, the actuality of this, and see that there's nothing but that.
Yeah.
And as you're training in it, so to speak, that'll sort of come and go and get stronger and weaker or whatever, and that's fine. Doesn't matter. Because again, just when you can be with it, and if you find yourself getting caught up in something, just let go. Don't worry about it. Don't fight with getting caught up in things. Just be easy with it. Because when you fight with it, you actually feed it. So when the radiance becomes more, when you become more aware of the radiance as actual presence, then just go to that, and that's all. And it will eventually eventually become more and more integrated with that as your basic condition. And as that occurs, ultimately you get freer and freer of the possibility of ever departing from that in any sense. Even if you do depart, it's not an actual departure. So it doesn't matter at that point.
Just nobody good.
So sometimes you talk about it being cumulative, going to the radiance, but also sometimes you talk about it being luck, whether or not.
Mm-hmm.
So is it luck whether or not you have the tendency to go to the radiance, or is it luck whether doing that ever has any effect? Or
No, doing it will always have an effect. It's luck whether or not you find yourself drawn to that.
I see.
Or you could say, I call it maturity sometimes, or karma, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Most humans don't seem to be at all interested in anything like this. And even if you told them about it, they still wouldn't be interested.
Yeah.
So that could be described as unlucky for them
Right.
in this context, or that they're immature, or that it's not their karma, or whatever. There's just different ways of spinning it. But it's just the case that is so, seems to be so. And then yet there are some people who seem all of a sudden to see the power of this, see the value of this, see the actuality of this, and those people could be said to be lucky,
Right.
or karmically ripe, or what have you.
On this, yesterday I had a really amazing experience swimming in and out of it, and it was pure luck. I didn't even, I was like, wow, it's kind of unfamiliar.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm postulating right now is the thinking. Like, thinking goes away.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm not even thinking, and then when I'm thinking, it becomes something a totally different experience.
Yeah.
It's like the opposite of thinking. It's just all experiencing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the native mode of radiance is not thought. It doesn't exclude thought, but it is not thought. It's more primal than thought. It's a pure intelligence that doesn't need to think to be intelligent. And yet thought occurs in that context, because since that's the fundamental context, naturally anything that occurs in that context. But when you begin to notice radiance and you begin to find yourself resting in it, you'll discover this fact that radiance is more primal than thought. And it is a pure transcendental intelligence. That it does not need to formulate itself in thought. And occasionally thought will occur. It will formulate itself in thought, just like it will formulate itself in all sorts of other sorts of experiential energies. But that's not. But the specifics aren't important. It's the radiance that's important. The radiance is intrinsically pure intelligence. And so as you are with the radiance, you will discover this fact more and more. The intelligence of radiance is much, much more powerful than the intelligence of thought. You're much smarter.
Yeah.
You're vastly smarter when you're resting in radiance than you are when you're thinking thought. Without needing to try. Again, this just becomes clearer and clearer, and the more you do it, the easier it is to do. The more you are integrated with it, the more natural it is, and so on and so forth. It builds up. It accumulates. It teaches you how to do it through familiarity.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole thing is just find yourself in radiance and rest there. As much as you can. When you stop, just let go. And when you find yourself in radiance again, just rest there. And just doing that, it will deepen and deepen spontaneously. And it does everything. It takes over. It does all the work. It does all the liberating and the what have you.
That's when the universe starts to show up.
Yes, exactly. Because, when I say it's an inconceivable intelligence, I mean that literally, and it's also inconceivably meaningful, communicative, explanatory. all in a very non-linear, non-rational, or let's say trans-rational mode. But again, it's self-verifying and it's very palpable. And again, that accumulates and increases with familiarity too. I mean, in Buddhism, it's often said the Buddha is omniscient, and this is what this refers to: is this primal intelligence that the fundamental condition inherently consists of. And so when you are resting in that condition, you are inconceivably intelligent. Not that there's a you per se, but that is the condition.
At first it seems very passive, but it's not passive and it's not active either. It's almost like a dance.
Mm-hmm. The radiance is pure positivity. So it is active without any activity, but it is. I mean, that's why I call it radiance, because it sort of it is a shining. It is an inherent dynamism without needing to particularly move. But it's pure positivity. It's not neutral and it's not negative. It is positive. And it does dance with itself. Its basic mode is a mode of sort of constantly, I mean, like the yin-yang symbol is evocative of that. It's constantly dancing with itself. And when you're sitting with the radiance, you feel this sort of dynamism, this constant, continuous sort of a dancing or flowing or flirting with itself, and just sort of things presenting themselves and being amalgamated and morphing into something else, and just never-endingly, like a beautiful symphony or dance or something. It's very meaningful, but again, very non-linear, non-rational. It would be difficult to translate most of that into words, but it's not necessary to, of course.
The wonder that we're not in it all the time.
Well, we are.
Yeah.
The wonder is we don't recognize it.
Right.
And that is, again, it seems to be its native mode, is that it seems to forget itself, and then after a period of time it gradually grows to remember itself through a process of what looks like maturing in its sensitivity of being with itself. And why this should be so, or even how it's so, is inconceivable. But it's empirically observable that seems to be the case. And we experience this in spirituality, people seem to be wandering around more or less in ignorance, and then every now and then someone begins to say, wait a minute, there's something interesting going on here, let me look into it. And then so they're entering sort of a spiritual adolescence or puberty or something, where they begin to wake up to engage with this actuality more profoundly, more directly, more accurately, which ultimately leads to realization, which is let's say a quantum leap of being with it much more profoundly.
almost say
And-
the
and
tires,
how-
the tires are playing the game.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so. I mean, we can't, again, it's
Boring.
impossible to sort out
Why?
exactly what it is or why it is or even how it is. So there's all these sort of ways of looking at it in terms of maturity, in terms of this and that. But ultimately, it's inscrutable as to why it should be so. But we can say that it certainly seems to be so, and and so spirituality proper is just a name for being engaged with this upside of starting to engage with this actuality. And when this actuality starts to engage with itself more nakedly, more directly, more profoundly than in its more ignorant modes.
Peter, when first when I hear about that term rest in the view, or just resting in this, I see passage. Now, when you just said about the dance, that just reminded me of something. I mean, there's something really fun when it comes.
Oh,
you know
yeah.
what I mean?
Oh,
And I
yeah.
wouldn't have that fun if
No.
I didn't, quote unquote, leave.
No, it's the most
So
fun.
in that sense, it is a dance.
Sure.
It's there's just something really, neat about
Yeah.
that recognition of it.
Yeah, for sure.
I like your choice of words of engage, though, too. There's just much of, obviously most of the time I'm not in that because I'm driving the car or I'm doing whatever it is I'm doing, and I know that I'm not engaged, and I have to somehow or other take myself aside and let go.
Mm-hmm.
And then it feels like engagement somehow or another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as you progress and become more and more skilled at engagement, you will also be able to be more engaged with it, even when you are doing things that previously you would have been unengaged to be doing. In other words, activities and functioning as a human being, and so on and so forth. In other words, it mixes, it interpermeates. At first it's something sort of special. You have to make a point of going to it and really being with it very clearly and basically and simply, or you'll find yourself bouncing out into your normal human frame of reference, or however you want to define it. But as you develop more familiarity and more skill with this condition, you begin to become more familiar with the common denominator of all modes, and then even when you're in modes that previously would have bounced you out of it, you're able to still be in it, and progressively more and more and more as time goes on. So it just builds and builds until you never leave it, no matter what you're doing. So you can be in a heated argument, or being in a car wreck, or being anything, and you're just with the radio. Because of course you always are, because there's nothing else. Of course, there is really no out of it. There's no such thing as out of it. But coming to see that as profoundly as it actually is the case is what this sort of learning curve is about. And at first, in the sort of the earlier stages of that learning curve, it feels very much like there's an out of it. There's an in it and an out of it. And so at that point, the practice is to just be in it when it's easy, and then when you start going out of it, just let go, and just stay with that cycle. But it trumps, it dominates, and the more you go to it, it builds up power, and you are able to go to it more profoundly and more easily as time progresses. And ultimately, and also you find when you go out of it, you're going out of it less far or less completely, less stupidly. You go out of it into less of a condition of real sort of thickness, whatever, right? However that seems to be. And ultimately, there still is that movement, but you never leave it, and you never come into it. You're just always in it, and any and all movement actually occurs within the radiance, because that is actually the case, in fact. The radiance is not at all static. It's very dynamic. And all the motion, the movement that we attribute to going in it and coming out of it is actually all within it. And when you're in the radiance, that same movement still occurs, but it no longer feels like leaving it and going to it. It just feels like a sort of a dynamism flowing within different modes of it.
The less I'm around, the easier it is to engage.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that I'm around, the more that I get called on or threatened or something like that, the less easy it is to find that.
Sure. And this is just because you have a habitual pattern of relating from a self point of view, from an ego point of view, and so when you're called on those modes, you have a tendency to snap back into that sort of native stance. But again, even that stance is actually not what it seems to be, and this is what reveals itself more progressively as your resting in it progresses, because even the stances of self and egoic orientation and so on is actually the radiance. It actually occurs within the radiance, although at first it seems like very much of an either or.
Sure does.
But ultimately that gets to be less and less so. But which isn't important. I mean, the fact that is the case is not particularly important. The main thing is just to, whatever it seems to be like wherever you are, just rest in the radiance when you can, when it's easy to, and then when you find yourself not, just let go. Don't worry about it. Don't try and cling to it. Just let go, very easy. And then when you find yourself able to go there again, just do that and rest in there, and just do that steadily. Or intermittently, however, and eventually that accumulates. That's sufficient, just that. And then all these other factors just become apparent over time, and they're not particularly important to understand or even to have heard. I mean, it's really very, very, very simple. Just touch the radiance whenever you can. I mean, be in it as easily as you can, gently, playfully, and without clinging. And when you leave it, that's fine. And just that, and that's the entire path. That's entirely sufficient. That leads inevitably to realization. Because the radiance wins, it trumps, it dominates, it undercuts everything. So you don't need to worry about techniques and this and that and the other. That's not important.
You said many times that there's no final version.
Mm-hmm.
I still don't understand what you mean by that. There's no final version.
You can't say what anything is, and you can't say how anything is. So a final version would be, this is a condition. Like, for example, I'm calling this condition radiance, which sounds like a final condition. But that's a trick, because radiance isn't anything that radiance isn't even radiance. I'm calling it radiance because it's meaningful to do so, but it's not true. It's not that it's actually radiance. What it is absolutely inconceivable. And you can't say what it is. And so in that sense, it's not anything. Is it this? Is it that? Is it the other? Well, it can seem to be any of that, but it isn't actually any of it. And it's not like, there's all these versions of it, but I'm going to get to the bottom. I'm going to get to the real one. There's no bottom. There's no real one. There's no final version. It endlessly presents as if it was this, that, or the other. It has endless nuance and characteristics and perspectives on itself, but none of them are final or true or absolute. It itself is, perspectiveless, and yet the mother of all perspective.
But when you experience it, though.
Yeah, of course.
But you just can't describe it.
Yeah.
Because- So that's what.
You know you're experiencing it because you're experiencing something you can't describe.
Okay.
You're experiencing something that is what it is regardless of what you're thinking it is. That's another sign of the radiance.
But it
The radiance doesn't go away when you stop believing in it. And when you start believing in it, it doesn't get any more to what it is.
But there's a certain, or maybe, I mean, it feels different for me, but I know when I feel it, that
Yeah. Yeah.
But maybe I'm not even feeling.
No, that's fine. No, that can seem that way. The radiance feels different than normal experience when you're used to having normal non-radiance experience, because the radiance is intrinsically unlimited. The radiance is intrinsically limitless and intrinsically liberated, and you feel that to various extents and in various ways. So it feels very open and bottomless and rich and luscious and multidimensional compared to a sort of an ignorant experience. But it can do so in infinite ways, and none of them are actually any truer than any other ones. It will always, it's endlessly surprising. It endlessly presents itself in new ways. And they're all real, and none of them is true. Or final, let's say. But the main thing is to recognize it's sufficiently to access it. That's all you need to worry about. Find your way to it when you feel it, when you feel this presence, this radiance, just rested now. And then if you find yourself, spinning off from it or something, don't worry about it, just let it go. Be very light about it, be very playful, sort of almost playful about it. Don't be too clinging or forceful about it, because that actually pushes you away from it, away from noticing.
Well, it's like it just comes on its own. It's like I can't do anything.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
just happens.
Yes. And just being easy with that is great. So here it comes, oh, cool. And there it goes, oh, cool. It'll come again, and here it comes again, oh, cool. And the more easy you are with it, the more it will come, and the more powerfully it will come. It's sort of the opposite. It's like in Through the Looking Glass, the faster you run, the less you get anywhere. When you just stand still, all of a sudden you get places. So the more you try to go to the radiance, the more you push away from it. The more you just let go, all of a sudden, there it is, there you are.
There is a certain acceptance which makes it.
Yeah, absolutely. You learn to ease. You learn that there's a kind of a letting go that you learn how to do with your energy. It's not a literal letting go. You just sort of feel, but you learn that feeling, and you learn how to do it. Where you just sort of let go into it, and it gives you access, and you let go into it more, and you go deeper into it, and so on. But it shows you how to do that. You discover that just by exposure, by trial and error. Again, it's not something you need to think about or learn.
But you do allow.
Oh yeah, very much. Yeah. And the more you letting go is being active with it. So trying to be active with it is actually not, doesn't give you access to it, but letting go of needing or wanting access to it, all of a sudden you're in it.
Peter, it's sort of like I've sort of said this before, but it's sort of like a shift. I mean, it's so slight too. I mean, it's not a movement, or anything. But sometimes if I just catch a bad mood, if I just sort of not concentrate on anything about the idea why or anything, but just what that is, and I see it, and I just sort of, I don't know, I just sort of go, and
Yeah.
yeah.
It's slippery. Let yourself be slippery, and all of a sudden, whoop,
Yeah,
you slip right into
you
it.
just sort of, but it's I guess that's letting go. I mean, it's letting go of whatever energy or wherever I was before, but it is feeling I feel like I'm.
Yeah. I mean, it's very simple, actually. The only thing that seems to take you out of it is holding anything to be anything. But what that holding consists of is very subtle, and we do it unconsciously, so we may not even be aware we're doing it. But in actual fact, if you're not with it, that means you're holding something to be a certain way, and if you can somehow release that holding, you will suddenly be with it.
Yeah, so an example I gave was like a mood.
Exactly. But I'm calling it holding, but what it actually is, you have to discover for yourself, because it's a subtle experiential thing. It's not obviously you're not holding something with your hand or anything.
No.
It's just a very subtle stance of being with something as if it was a certain way. And when you all of a sudden let it get ambiguous, let it get open-ended, all of a sudden it opens up and it reveals itself as not being that thing. And once it's not that thing, it's anything. And once it's anything, it's the radiance. Because the radiance intrinsically is anything.
I mean, again, that's sort of where that idea, what we were talking about before about curiosity comes in. What is this mean? And so then it's sort of...
Yeah. The more you think you know, the more stuck you are. And when you don't know anything, then you know everything. But all of this, you feel your way into it, and you just, because it's a direct energy stance is what it is. It's a subtle energy yoga, and it's describable in these kinds of terms, but ultimately you have to discover for yourself what that really means in terms of the doing of it, what it feels like, what holding feels like, what letting go feels like.
Yeah, I could not even tell you what's moving, or what was.
No, for sure. No, you can't. But you get to a point where you can do it without being able to say what it is.
Yeah.
It's like riding a bicycle or something, You learn to do it by doing it, and once you know how to do it, you know how to do it. But you can tell someone how. Because it's not like that. It's an energy engagement. It's a way of holding your energy a certain way, and it's effective. It works.
Yeah.
And it's totally nonverbal. It's totally just direct engagement. And there's many ways to be directly engaged with your energy of your experience, and learning artfulness in being with that is learning this yoga. And you learn to be with your energy in non-holding ways, and all of a sudden you have more and more access to the openness, to what I'm calling the radiance.
It's making me a little dumbfounded.
Mm-hmm.
More and more, I just have less and less to say, and more and more, occasionally, it's like you keep talking about the television. It feels like I'm on stage. It feels like everything is just not. It's like there's a window right in front of me. All this is just not really quite here.
Yeah,
which is a little eerie at times.
No, it's weird. What this condition is very, very weird compared to sort of normal human consensus reality. What this actually is and what it feels like is incredibly strange. It's very common for people that stumble onto this if they don't have a framework within which to approach it, of either a teacher or someone who's experienced with it, to think they're going crazy. Because all of a sudden, the world, you say, wow, there's no world here. And that's, you start saying things like that on the street, and the men in white stuff drive up all of a sudden,
Or even when you don't have the words for it, you sort of suddenly feel isolated.
Yeah. And that's very commonplace, because you won't find a lot of people you can talk to about this stuff. You start to try and talk to people about this stuff, and they're going to look at you funny. What?
But the other thing that happens is nobody, may talk to you, but you also, I am looking at people now, I see stories all over the place.
Oh, yeah, of course.
It's like, wow, that's, these terrific stories that are going on, It's, movie.
Yeah, people think they're inhabiting plot lines.
Yeah.
You know, and it's fascinating when you see that because they seem to have no awareness that it's all just stories. They seem to think it's all actual.
Yeah, sometimes it gets a little lonely.
Yeah, it can. But then we have events like this, which is
Yeah, right.
a support group for burgeoning psychotics.
Virtual psychotics.
Burgeoning.
Oh, yeah, burgeoning psychotics.
How to ease into your
Well, in the
psychosis
virtual
gracefully
world,
and
we look
gently.
like psychotics.
Well, I find a lot of, how to put it, really contact maybe, or reciprocity of some sort that's out there roaming around.
Oh, yeah.
It may not be about words or
Oh, absolutely.
anything. It just,
Oh, I agree completely. Yeah, you know, I have more intimate contact and engagement with people than I ever have in my life, even though I don't talk to people hardly at all. I mean, in these kind of settings, I do a lot of talking, but when I'm just out in the world, I basically sit quietly unless someone asks me something, and it's usually something like pass the salt, and I go like that. And yet I feel a profound intimate contact with everybody, whether they acknowledge it or not.
yeah,
But it's not my concern.
Yeah, it's like it's like you're seen through, and
Yeah.
if somebody is confused in themselves, if they're in their plot line, they can't really see that, even though you can be seen through.
Yeah. But they feel it.
Yeah.
People feel it.
Yeah, even sometimes they can't. But whatever. It just seems that
I guess ultimately what happens, and I know you described this before, is that ultimately you're just flowing with the radiance, and it's
Yeah.
like all of that stuff that's going on out there, and forms that you're seeing is like,
Yeah.
it has no meaning.
Yeah.
So it's just your interaction with this radiance that
Yeah.
is
Yeah. And of course, that's all it's ever been.
yeah.
But we don't notice that when we're all caught up in our plot lines. But even then, it's never been anything but just being with the radiant
Yeah.
field. But when you notice it directly, it's so much more full and luscious and nourishing and satisfying and
Yeah.
inspiring and entertaining and, so blah, 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 blah. And liberating and transcendent, and I mean, it's just the perks of noticing what this is are never-endingly wonderful.
It is. It's like I don't really care what I do anymore. It's like, I'm just so entertained. It's so low cost,
Oh yeah, that's great.
It's like, gee,
Yeah, you get to be a real cheap date. Just park them over in a corner of the room. They'll be happy as a clam. You sit there. I'll come and get you when it's time to go home. That's great.
Low maintenance zombies.
Yeah. No, it's true.
you talk about catching more and you getting more and more involved, and I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I'm interested also in the pull in the other direction and back into the kind of stupidity.
Oh yeah.
I
That's
feel
it.
that still.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's it.
So,
Because those modes don't ever go away. It's inaccurate to think of unfoldment as leaving something and going to something else. What it actually is discovering a profundity within what has always been the case, and what has always been the case actually persists and is still here. So you don't leave your old modes and go to new modes. Your old modes, you bring them along, they come right along, but you discover a profundity within them so that they don't need to be different than they ever were. But as you're getting there, when you are less deeply in the profundity that is in those modes, there can be a kind of a backlash where you sort of kick back into your sort of habitual modes of relating to experience, and that's very normal, and I think that's actually intrinsically helpful. It's not a problem. I think it's actually a positive aspect of the unfoldment, because it's kind of like a mixing or a stirring, where you're in one mode and you go to another mode, and by going back and forth, you're sort of discovering the common denominator.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, even though it feels like, oh God, I've lost it, this is terrible. Actually, it's not like that. Actually, it's a process of integration, where you are learning to be in the old mode in a new way, or in a new perspective, and you do that by repeatedly being thrust back into it. And ultimately, you will find yourself moving in and out of various modes, and it won't feel like a gain or a loss of anything. You can be in very personal modes, you can be in very transcendental modes, and it's all the same, because it is all the same. But you get that is the case very profoundly after this, typically prolonged period of integration.
This may be off in a way, but it's also the sense of kind of wanting to leave breadcrumbs or something.
Yeah, but that's still being with it immaturely to a degree, because you don't really need to.
Well, that's what I'm sensing.
But you get to a point of that.
But there's also like a sense of honoring the way things are, however.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So it's kind of like I don't want to forget it.
Yeah, and that's okay. It's all good. It's all part of the process. But no mode of being with it persists for long. Every mode of being with it is a transition into something deeper. So a way that you feel like you tend to be with it, occasionally, let's say, at this period in your life, there will come a time when this is no longer the case. It'll be something else. This is the yoga of radiant presence.
Let's start. What have you had? You started it. Yeah, right.
Here, I really loved our sessions during the retreat and the prayer well hall.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what they're talking about here online. They're saying they hear the fan. It's like the prayer wheel.
Oh, there it is. Yeah. Oh, great.
I don't know if the fan quite captures the
No.
sound or feeling of
It
the prayer
does for
wheels.
me.
No.
I was sitting right next to them. It's
Maybe if
close.
an 18-wheeler went by on the road out there, that would sort of add to the ambiance. But the
There
general
were a lot of
effect of
words
everything.
Every 3 seconds.
It kind of had a rhythm to it too. And we're getting captured and hypnotized by the rhythm every now and then.
A lot of prayers are going wasted. Man, doesn't have the prayers. It's been
Nothing but prayers.
Nothing but prayers.
Nothing but
Every atom is a prayer wheel, spinning the infinite prayers of radiance.
Oh,
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah indeed.
And Emma Ho.
Take a break in a few minutes. I wanted to, if anyone hadn't heard, I wanted to point out this book I brought tonight. It's a new publication, just came out about a month ago. It's another book in the series of the Masters of Shangsheng, which some of you may have seen. It's a very high level Dzogchen book. It's not technical. It's just these incredibly gorgeous expositions of the view of the natural condition, and I recommend it highly if you're interested in such things.
What's the name?
We're gonna pass it around.
Who published it?
Don't know. It's available on Amazon and anywhere else. But I recommend it. I don't know if any of you, some of you have seen the book, The Masters of Shangsheng. I don't remember the exact title that was circulating several months ago. But I recommend it highly if you find yourself drawn to that sort of thing. It's an inspiring read. It's if you like this kind of stuff. And if you don't, why are you here? There's some good movies out. This is the pith teachings of the female lineage in Bonpo, female Dzogchen lineage, what they call Dakinis. The other one was the pith teaching of the male Dzogchen lineage. But it's really nice stuff. It's very high level.
I'm surprised there's a difference.
Well, I don't know if there's a difference, but there's not all that much difference in what they have to say, of course. But it happens to be that that's what it's purported to be, and so.
I see. Yeah.
Anyway, why don't we have a little break? So online people will be back in 10 minutes or so. A dearth of sweets. What's up with that?
It's too hot to eat.
Watermelon.
We're just living on reading. Ooh, that would have been good.
Wednesday.
Yeah, we'll try to get some. I haven't seen any stand. Have you guys seen any more?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Trader Joe's even.
Are you coming Wednesday?
No. I think that they wouldn't go up the coast.
So, Peter, in the case of, revelation, my tendency is to try to grasp what actually is going on. Is it necessary to do that or not?
No, not at all. And you learn to let go of that tendency to grasp, because that actually if anything, diminishes it and makes it less. It's fuller and bigger and more multidimensional the more you let go of it. But again, you learn that over time, so it's not anything you need to try and do or something. But
Well, it's more a matter of noticing that it occurs to me that it is harder to actually kind of quantify what's going on.
Yeah.
Like there's not words like it used to be that things would come up regarding what's happening.
Right.
But nowadays it's much harder for words at all.
Yeah, and that becomes the case. And the more you sink into the more profoundly you learn to be with the radiance, the more nonverbal it becomes, and also the more multidimensional and strange it becomes. In the sense of being anything that would be describable or thinkable or even followable in any sense. I mean, it really gets very extremely nonlinear, extremely multidimensional. So, But again, all of this does itself over time. You don't need to worry about trying to do anything or trying not to do anything. Just go to it to whatever degree you can in whatever way you do at the time, and that will spontaneously deepen and spontaneously self-correcting. Radiance, being with radiance is self-correcting. It shows you how to do it, just inherently, non-verbally. Just by being with it, eventually you get better at it.
Yeah, because the sense is that I need to understand what it is so that I can then,
Yeah. And that's how it feels at a certain point, but it develops beyond that.
So here's a question about inherent intelligence, I guess. If the radiance is so super intelligent, I just bought a nice little LED light bulb, and I doubt that any enlightened person had anything whatever to do with creating.
On the contrary, LED lights are totally a product of enlightenment. Everything is, because what does anything? What does invention? What does processing? I mean, even engineers. What enables bright engineers to do what they do? It's not their own efforts that does it. It's the inherent intelligence that shows up as their efforts and shows up much more profoundly as their inspiration and their very life force that accomplishes all of these things. In other words, you don't need an enlightened person. Reality itself is enlightenment, is enlightened, and reality does everything. Enlightenment does the weather, enlightenment does the laws of physics, enlightenment does all invention, enlightenment shows ants how to build anthills, and bees how to make beehives, and so on and so forth. Because this system that is doing everything is pure intelligence. And you can see it in all these astounding modes of functionality that spontaneously appear within it. What we call life forms, or what we call the behavior of inanimate objects and forces and stuff. I mean, how does the sun know how to shine? There's a lot going on there. It's very complex and subtle. And yet effortlessly, spontaneously, just poof. Right? Because it's an expression of this profound, inconceivable inherent intelligence, which is just the ground, the zero ground of all of this. It's what all of this is being done within, and what is doing all of this, objectively and subjectively, individually and objectively, and so on and so forth.
Is it the same for? Well, I don't know. A lot of people in Satsang have a very poor idea about words, but I love words. I love poetry.
Sure.
And but there are words, and then there are words. I mean, art. If something's used in an artistic way, number one, what it's doing isn't it breaking down concepts. It's breaking down anything that we could really hold. And so it gets more intuitive, and that gets us closer to this, right?
Yeah, it reveals multidimensionality. It's like
Right.
poetry. You see the work of a brilliant poet, and they're using a few words, but what they're doing is not logical or rational. It doesn't
No.
make sense. It's not a product of thought so much as it is a product of nonlinear intelligence that can embody a profound, more hyperdimensional intelligence than thought can, than sort of linear, logical, defined thought can include. But even words aren't really words. Logic isn't really logic because it's all being done by this translogical inherent intelligence. So everything whatsoever transcends what it seems to be. Even the most limited modes of expression and functionality are inconceivable expressions of the inherent intelligence.
I think our forms of art, music, everything is mathematics, actually, even pure mathematics, is aiming at trying to at hyper dimensional. I mean, to get beyond.
Sure.
Our
And
bounds.
at its best, it succeeds. I mean, that's what art does. Art. You go to a museum and you see some great masterpieces, and sure, it's just paint on a canvas or whatever, but you look at it and you go, oh, wow.
Yeah.
Because it does something, it communicates, it evokes an open-endedness, it evokes a depth and a hyperdimensionality that completely transcends, he's got this color here and that color there. It's like, that's not what it's about. It's about, it's about doing magic, And magic is, in this context, is literally using a linear medium as a jumping off point into absolute nonlinearity, into absolute multidimensionality. But the basis of it might seem to be linear, but that's just like a launching pad into something that completely transcends it.
I mean, you could say that even there's obvious painting or obvious art that definitely take you to that other place, that obvious. You could even find that in what you would call crap, so to speak.
I know. All form.
But the potential is right there within every piece of art, no matter what spectrum it's on.
Not just art, but all form.
Everything, yes.
You can sit and look at a carpet. You can sit and look at your shoes. You can sit and look at a stain of dirt on the wall, and And I mean, this is what I call noticing, which is discovering this hyperdimensionality that actually all experience exists within and consists of. So you discover that openness, that transcendence anywhere you look. I mean, art is just a deliberate and explicit playing on that, taking advantage of that effect. But in actuality, that effect is everywhere to be found. You can't exclude it. You can't not find it. Because the basic substance of all experience, what I call radiance, is fundamentally transcendental. And you can't take transcendentality and use it as the building block to build something mundane. You know? You can't take light and use it to build something dull. It's just because your building blocks, your raw material itself doesn't do that. Your raw material itself goes beyond that.
How does dull seem to appear?
Yeah, that sounds like...
It's imagined into existence.
Well, isn't imagination also light?
Yeah. But it's not. But dull isn't actually dull. Dull only seems to be dull. Dull convinces itself that it's dull through inconceivable transcendental intelligence. It takes a lot. It takes a lot. It takes a lot for transcendental intelligence to see itself as dull. This is a whole lot of horsepower being used in that mechanism.
Entropy
he gets so great he goes somewhere else.
And then it's not dull. And then it's
Yeah.
dull, but it's,
Yeah, because dull isn't actually dull. Of course, that's the point.
it's radiant dull.
Yeah. I mean, not noticing is one of the inherent intelligence's greatest tricks, and one of its most powerful effects. How, in the midst of this intrinsic transcendence, it can manufacture an apparent condition of not noticing is absolutely, it's showing off when it does that. Want to see a really good trick? Check this out. and you get sucked into ignorance for a few 100,000 incarnations. That was something, wasn't it? Want to see it again? Look what I can do.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Good joke. That's the inherent intelligence's version of a kick me sign that gets taped to your back,
There's a woman at work and she was talking about how she likes to go to the gym and she doesn't mind that it's difficult and everything. She said a little suffering never hurt anyone, which I thought was inadvertently
very profound.
Yeah, profound.
Well, it's true. It only hurts for a few 100,000 incarnations. And then all the pain turns out to have been transcendent bliss anyway, so
right.
You don't really care once you see it.
And there was no one to be hurt.
The whole thing's a mirage.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's an Australian runner, and her line used to be, things inevitable, suffering's optional.
Yeah. Sure, yeah.
Seems like just relaxing brings the acuity, and I'm wondering if there's another way to engage, for lack of a better word, so that the visual and the mental fields, drop out a little easier with less constructs.
Well, it's a self-correcting process. It teaches you how to do it. Relaxing is definitely a major way in, but basically, as you find yourself engaging in this, it, over a period of time, develops more and more subtlety and more sophistication in being able to be with itself more and more profoundly. So all of these modes teach themselves just by this process. So I mean, that's the wonderful thing about it. It's so easy. It's self-correcting. So all you need to do is find yourself just touching this to any degree, and you will spontaneously go into it deeper and deeper over time, and it shows you how to do it.
It's self-correcting.
Yeah. It teaches itself. It shows you how. It pulls you in. So it's wonderful. It's just so easy because you don't need to build up a big language of tricks and techniques and this sort of thing. I mean, you can, but it's not really necessary and doesn't really add anything to it. Because even with all these tricks and techniques, you have to discover what they mean experientially for yourself anyway.
Right.
And that comes when it comes anyway. So I mean, it's just sort of redundant and unnecessary to be explicit about that kind of thing. Just the main thing is just touch it to whatever degree that is easy for you, and that's sufficient. That alone, over a period of time, will just spontaneously deepen and spontaneously you get better at it. It just does itself. So hey, kind of nice. But yeah, relaxing is a biggie in terms of just let go, drop stuff, let go, relax. Just don't try to do anything. Don't try to not do anything. Just sort of be loose and easy and open without trying to be loose and easy and open. Just sort of let go, and that gets your foot in the door. And once that's happened, it's all over. It just takes a bit of time. Why not?
This is a person from Montreal, maybe years late. And he says his English isn't good, so it's just a very simple question. He wanted to know what you thought about hand mudras.
All mudras are powerful expressions of meaningful and intelligence. And all mudras essentially means all forms. But you can do this in terms of bodies. You can do, if you find that, virtually any positioning of your body in any way generates or reflects a kind of an energy resonance that is profoundly meaningful. And you can do this just in subtle ways. Just virtually anything. You just do it like a slow motion dance, and you feel it, and you'll feel it'll be like you're shooting through space or something, going to different galaxies or something, because it's just amazing the different energy resonances that these kinds of things set up. And certainly that's true in terms of formalized mudras, and stuff like that are traditional. But it's true in terms of body posture. It's true in terms of any posture. So holding your body in different ways, holding with your head down, holding with your head back, holding with your shoulders, with your back straight, holding with your back humped. All these things completely change your energy resonance, and it profoundly sort of retunes your energy system, and will reflect different qualities and different sort of meaningfulnesses across the board. And this applies also not just to your body, but to things outside. So you can take something, and shift it like that, and all of a sudden everything's completely different. You take a cup and you move it a quarter of an inch to the right, and all of a sudden everything's completely different. And it's a matter of being sensitive to noticing the way in which that is so. And this is a good way to play with and to discover and to explore subtle energy. Because when you're used to relating to things, coarsely and materially, you don't think in terms of those terms. Like, well, my hand's sitting here, my hand's sitting here, and who cares, right? But then when you feel what your experience really feels like with your hand sitting there, and then you move it a quarter of an inch, feel what that feels like. And it's entirely different, And so you discover there's just this endless spectrum of energies that experientially are present, that are reflected in different postures, and you can use this as a vehicle of exploration, of learning to be with subtle energy, learning to increase your sensitivity to subtle energy, and literally exploring other dimensions, because every mode of energy resonance is essentially a whole spin-off of other dimensions.
That's sort of what I was thinking about when I asked you before about, when I was talking about shifting. I don't know, maybe I was doing something with my hand or my body, but I'm definitely try that. That sounds cool.
and not just physically, you can shift little things in your mind, and that does the same thing.
Yeah, but I'm going to try some other stuff too, because that's great.
But any sort of juxtaposition, slight shifting of form, completely takes the entire universe of subtle energies and shifts it through dimensions, shifts it across like hyperspatial dimensions.
But you have to sort of be noticing that you're doing that, right?
Yeah.
You can't just,
It always happens, but if you don't notice it, you don't appreciate it, so who cares?
Exactly, yeah.
It's and at that point you begin to notice the incredible power of things like posture, things like body language, things like the way you say words rather than the words you say, and and gestures that you use while you're talking and things like that. And these things are huge, and they have vast, powerful effects, but in subtle energy. And if you're not sensitive to it, you aren't aware of that whole spectrum of profundity. But it is available.
Well, don't laugh. I have this great desire to do astral travel or something like that. I mean,
astral travel's easy. Just
discover the power of this.
Just think that you can do it and see what happens. Yeah. Astral travel is basically just subtle energy dimensions.
Yeah.
And subtle energy dimensions start right here. This is the threshold of subtle energy dimensions. So step across the threshold and see where you are. See what you find.
I had a really weird experience up at Ratner Wing, but I we were in the meditation hall, and I was looking at this bare tree. It was a pole, and there was a bird on it. And I said, I really want to be there. And then all of a sudden, I mean, I was really concentrating, and all of a sudden the bird moved. I pushed him off the pole. It was cool.
Sure, but you will find that you participate in everything that happens in your experience.
Yeah.
You participate actively in everything that happens in your experience, in subtle ways.
Yeah.
But, you know, you have to become aware of this is synonymous with becoming aware of subtle energy. And then you discover the interconnectedness of phenomena and the meaningfulness of phenomena and the multidimensionality of phenomena.
Does the subtle affect the gross?
I'm sorry?
Does the subtle affect what we might call the gross?
Well, they don't affect. They're all the same thing. They interpermeate each other. They're aspects of the same thing.
I don't want to be subtle. I want to do it.
I don't want to be subtle. Are you kidding? You can keep your subtle.
No, but I understand.
The hell with subtle. Where's the Jack Daniels?
Right.
Those subtle energy fields are like an ocean.
Oh, yeah.
They are constantly in movement, constantly affected by what's going on around them.
Mm-hmm.
And they're also a sort of wave-like.
Yeah, oh, yeah. Yeah. Absolute dynamism, absolute interconnectedness, absolute sort of resonant, mutual resonating at a distance, like radio waves kind of thing. I mean, all this kind of stuff. And everything's affecting everything else, and everything's being affected by everything. I mean, it's just this intense, inconceivable interactivity on every level of subtlety. And when I say every level, I'm talking infinite dimensions, literally. I mean, it's just, there's no limit to the different modes.
And everything is visible.
Yeah, it's all completely explicit. You just need to notice it. The only thing that hides anything is you're not looking at it.
That's right.
It's all right here, right now.
I notice that when I look at people, I can see basically where they're at.
Of course.
But there are many times I don't look.
Yeah, sure. Well, there's no need to need. You
Every
don't
now
need
and
to.
again, there's people stand out like a beacon, or a lighthouse or something.
Yeah,
They send out this strong pulse.
Yeah.
But you had said, I can't remember when, that things are not even remotely what they seem to be.
Yes.
So could you reconcile what John was just saying with that idea?
Well, they're one and the same. What things seem to be is any limited view of them. And there are unlimited views of any and all phenomena. So, and when you're seeing any phenomena from unlimited views, it's not anything in particular. It's too many things to specify, you might say.
Mm-hmm.
So if it seems to be a certain way, then you're looking at it partially. When you see things more fully as they are, they're so multidimensional that you can't resolve it into coherence to turn it into a thing or a condition that is in even vaguely specifiable. So this infinite multidimensionality of just so many dimensions of subtlety and what have you, which is explicitly the case, period, across the board. If you see it as it is to any degree whatsoever, it's virtually impossible to hold any condition to be even a condition, let alone anything you might hold it to be.
Mhm.
So if anything seems to be anything, it's vastly more than that. If you can't resolve it into being anything because it's more than that, then you've got the more, and it's even more than that.
Well, exactly. I get the sense that vastly more than comes in an infinite set of degrees.
Yes, absolutely infinite. Exactly so. In other words, it's intrinsically unresolvable into coherence. While it presents as arbitrary degrees of coherence, so it's possible to resolve it into as many different degrees of coherence as you want, but it is intrinsically more than that. So, I mean, we do this all the time in practicality. We deal with things as if they were coherent, but it's arbitrary, and they aren't actually that. And it's fine to do that, just don't think the thing actually is the coherence that you're resolving it to as a matter of convenience or expedience. So there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's believing that's objectively the case that generates delusion. In other words, thinking things are limited even though they can seem to be limited, and you can empirically deal with them as if they were limited for practical purposes. But don't let yourself believe that that's actually the case, or you erect a limited world that you then feel like you're living in, which is a recipe for samsara.
Well, doesn't that include like that we are a body that ages, for instance?
All
like
that.
Everybody holds that paradigm thought form, and then it's like, well, what if you really let that go? Because there's no way to know that we're really aging. I mean, because
Of
what
course.
we are is just so much more. Than,
Exactly. Sure.
So, yeah, it just seems because you fall into any kind of limited thought
Mm-hmm.
that makes it so.
Yeah, and if you do that, you're falling into delusion because reality is not actually like that. The actual state of affairs cannot be held to be anything in particular. It can't be held as this or that.
So the thought's what's aging us, or
It
it's not
doesn't actually age
empirically-
us. It doesn't age us, but it creates the mode of aging, which it can then be held to be objectively true, when it's not. It's one aspect of an inconceivable infinity, which has infinite other interpretations as well. In other words, that's one way of seeing things, but it's a very, very limited way of seeing
Very
things.
limited,
And to
yeah.
hold that as being what it is objectively, especially all that it is to be living in delusion, because you're cutting yourself off from the actuality, which is, of course, infinitely multidimensional.
This infinite multidimensionality up against the inherent practicality of intelligence
Mm-hmm.
is completely mysterious and unexplainable. I mean,
Yeah.
it just doesn't go together.
Well, it does and it doesn't, because
Yeah.
the functionality is also infinitely multidimensional. You don't need to dumb things down to be functional. It may seem that that's what you're doing, but it isn't actually.
No, I think I can appreciate that.
Like driving a car, you may think, when I'm driving a car, I'm thinking very simple. But that's not true. When you're driving a car is a completely non-linear, fluid experience. How do you do it? Or riding a bicycle, it's like, you can do it, and you could come up with a lot of interpretations and descriptions of how you do it, but in actual fact, the actual doing of it is an entirely non-linear flow experience, and is intrinsically open-dimensional. It includes all sorts of subtleties and nuance and non-linear modes, just effortlessly and spontaneously. They're just right there, for example. So again, the idea that linearity is necessary for function is itself a spin doctrine, because in actuality all functioning is intrinsically non-linear. Like the earlier question about the who designed the light bulbs not being a product of enlightenment. That's one way of describing it. But in actual fact, the very process of having a light bulb designed is so nonlinear and includes so many aspects of inspiration and participation and intelligence and life force and blah blah blah. Just God knows it can't be described in grocery list terms of what factors went into it. So it's an entirely mysterious, nonlinear, multidimensional functioning that it could be described in various specific terms, but you'd be leaving out an awful lot, which is what we do with descriptions. When we describe, well, this is the way you do this. First you do that, then you do that, then you do that, and that's how you do it. It's like, well, yeah, that's not untrue, but there's, you threw out the infinity part of it, which is also right in there. You just kind of left that part out, didn't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is what we do.
Little infinity going.
Well, it's even like baking a
Bingo.
The recipe for a cake, looks nothing like the cake.
Yeah, of course.
You go like, okay, well, this is the cake.
Yeah, everything and everything is completely unexplainable when you get
Yeah,
down to
that's the
it.
bottom line. We're talking miracle in the beginning, miracle in the middle, and miracle in the end. And, that's pretty much the long and the short of it. And it's even a miracle that it can seem to not be miraculous. That it can seem to be linear or simple or...
I think that's the perversity of the universe again somehow.
Yeah.
So we continue to end up at the if you will, the bottom. At least for me, just keep letting go.
Yeah.
Just keep letting go.
That's it. Just let go and then let go and then let go and then let go and repeat.
Yeah. And repeat. Yeah.
I was saying in that book, at the end there, where they just say, ya, 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 ya. I don't know what that
What
means.
book is it?
but-
What?
It means what you think,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
It's a word that's translated as sealed,
Sealed.
which means like a dharma seal.
Yeah.
But it does. But what sealed actually means is it's like ringing a bell. It's like, yeah, this rings true.
Yeah.
This is true. So it's sealed in its own truth, in its own in the fact that it's true on every level.
Mm.
In this pristine awareness, this radiant presence, is the Dharma.
Yes, this is
the
it.
Dharma. Yes.
This is the Dharma.
Yeah.
And Dharma is just formal Dharma is just various ways of trying to direct attention to this. So, but this is it. This is the thing itself.
It's as good a dharma as you'll get anywhere.
Oh, it's the real thing.
Right.
There's no deeper or higher or fuller or more profound Dharma than this Dharma. This is it.
The one thing I've come to like about Dzogchen is that it doesn't have nearly the elaborations and embellishments and the extra trappings as some other points of view.
Well, Dzogchen relies on the inherence. Dzogchen relies on what it inherently is, so you don't need to enact it. It's enacting itself by being what it is, and that's the whole thing. So there's nothing to add to it, nothing to be done, nothing to be celebrated, nothing to be practiced, because that would be an attempt to add to that which is already being done, which is not necessary because it's already being done. So you let what's already happening do the work by being what it is, and that turns out to be sufficient.
Appreciated?
Huh?
Can it be appreciated?
Sure it can, but it doesn't even need to be appreciated. Its nature is appreciation. It doesn't need to be clarified because its nature is clarity. Yeah. It doesn't need to be revealed because its nature is revelation. So again, it by its inherent nature is entirely sufficient, and across the board. And when you see that, trying to add to it, trying to improve it, trying to do more is basically really absurd. And it's silly. It's inefficient. Yeah. You can do it. There's no harm, but there's nothing gained by that, by the effort. So why bother? Yeah, I mean, I use this word inherent a lot, and that's the very essence of this whole path, this whole nature, is that what it inherently is the whole story. So it doesn't even need to be seen for that to be the case. It takes care of that too. It does the seeing. So it's the ultimate lazy man's approach, lazy person's approach. Apologies, lady.
So all those addings on are really just a subtle way of still holding on to.
Yeah, it's redundant. You're holding on to that it needs it, which is not being mature enough to see the profound completeness of this and to see the way of which this absolutely does not require any kind of enactment. It's enacting itself.
It's not easy to add things onto it to turn it into a lifestyle. It's, pure. I don't know pure, but just.
Well, Dzogchen has a whole lexicon of terms to describe it, which are great fun. They talk about primordial purity. It's pure from the beginningless beginning. It never was not pure. It's intrinsically pure. It can't not be pure. So it is purity itself, and it cannot be rendered impure by anything whatsoever, because nothing exists other than it. And purity cannot taint purity. In Dzogchen philosophy, they go into a lot of those kinds of circumlocutions of exploring this aspect of it and that aspect of it. But even that is more fun than anything, because it doesn't add anything to the fact itself. Embodies all that without it needing to be elaborated, without it needing to be designated.
I move, I can feel a lot of energy shift in different things, but I don't know what you mean by dimensions.
Well, dimensions means sort of fields of nuance, and it can be very subtle. It's like, I mean, you can tell if you do it grossly, but you can explore it most clearly if you do it very finely. Like sit anywhere where you happen to be sitting, and have whatever posture you're in, shift your index finger like a quarter inch, and feel what that feels like. Just feel in the most general terms, just in terms of nuance, whatever daydreams happen, whatever just little subtle flavors sort of waft through your experience, and then shift it back and feel what that feels like. And then shift it a quarter inch back again and feel what that feels like. So we're talking, I mean, I use the word subtle energy, so it's subtle, but there's no limit to the degrees of subtlety that can be experienced. Experience can follow very, very, very subtle things. I mean, obviously we can follow very, what we might consider gross things, but we can be with very, 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 very subtle qualities and flavors. We're extremely sensitive if we let ourselves notice it. And in these kinds of experiments, you can discover these, layers of subtlety you would never have even acknowledged before. But it sort of brings it under the searchlight of it's like a lab experiment, and you can discover, like, wow, you discover things you wouldn't have even thought were there, and of course there's no words for them because they're just little subtle, tiny nuances of flavor, experiential flavor and things, very, very tenuous, very subtle. But when you go into them, they're rich and luscious, and they open into a whole world. I mean, a whole dream, And there's no limit to how many of these kinds. That's what I mean by dimensions. There's no limit to how many of these kinds of realms of nuance, realms of flavor, can show up experientially, and they interrelate to aspects of form and behavior as well.
So I have a question about that. So is Nancy doing that, or is that the universe doing that?
Well,
or is that fair?
It's a moot point because that's too oversimplified in both. You're implying two different degrees of oversimplification, and neither is actually true, of course. The true condition can't be said because there is no Nancy and there is no universe.
Well, I was afraid of that.
Don't be afraid.
One day a couple weeks ago, I went to the office. I went to different meetings, and I had student meetings, and then did some stuff at home. And I was just shocked at every time I would change the situation. It was another world, and I was sort of standing back and just sort of watching all this. It was like first I went to Mars, then I went to Venus, then I went to Saturn, then I went to Uranus, and I found myself sort of befuddled, thinking, well, am I in the same reality or aren't I? And if I'm not, then who's doing that?
Yeah. But all those questions aren't answerable because they're too oversimplified. Again, you're trying to pin down something which is intrinsically not pinnable down, not pin downable, pinnable downable.
Thanks, McMuffin.
So again, it's not like that. It's just you do it itself. And it opens to transcendence. And what is transcendence? Well, you can't say. It's transcendent. So is it you or is it the universe? Well, you can't say. It's transcendent. Because what you are is transcendent. What the universe is transcendent. So even if you could answer those questions, it would be a non-answer because the answer itself is more another than what it is. So if I said, no, it's Nancy, then okay, yeah, but what is Nancy? Then Nancy is Nancy, but Nancy is also more another than Nancy. Then again, it opens up into infinity. So, I mean, the basic point of this stuff is it cannot be accurately resolved. It's unresolvable into anything that can be held to be anything in particular, while yet being inclusive of all particularities that are present, all specificity that is present experientially, and there's an unlimited degree of that. So I mean, the whole thing just, But you can't make sense of it, and the more you are with it, the less the urge to try to do so will kick in. Or let's say the less strongly it will kick in. And even if you can resolve something to something, what you've resolved it to, if you look at what's actually there, that turns out to be an infinite openness. So it's only a pretense of resolution, and it's not an actual resolution. You haven't actually resolved anything, because the answer you've come up with is a non-specific infinity itself. So all of a sudden, you're back where you started.
I find myself not paying attention to the abstractions anymore.
Good.
And they're just all happening there.
Yeah.
Just kind of,
Excellent. Yeah, radiance is supremely concrete. Radiance is what is actually present. Why use these two words together, radiant presence? Because radiant is what is present, what is actually present in your experience. And it can be inconceivably subtle and nuanced, but it still is actually present. And abstraction is present as abstraction, but the meanings of abstraction are not.
Yeah, I mean, we just, we discuss this again and again, that abstraction, everything is mysterious. We can't figure anything out. So it just kind of finally has sunk in, and it's like, why pay attention to what you will never resolve?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, it's about quitting time, so I'm going to shut down the internet. Good night, internet people.